Is Alex here
yet?
Ready.
Or... Alex is here. So we're going to kick off with our first session, which you still get to see Lisa and myself, but I'm going to add Alex Crane to our stream. Hello, Alex.
Good morning. How's it going?
It is great. So, Alex, do you want to give a bit of an intro about yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Alex Crane. I'm on the enterprise architecture team at Chick-fil-A. Kind of as it relates to Cube, I was a part of our team that rolled out Cube to all of our roughly 2,500 locations in the chain. So we've had a good bit of experience with Cube over the past few years.
So I feel like you would describe yourself as, or Chick-fil-A is a super user of everything Cube.
I'm a little afraid of what that ends up trying to encompass that we have expertise with, but we've definitely used it heavily. How far that translates into full mastery of Cube would probably be an entirely different conversation.
Okay. So I want to quickly say, if you have questions as we go along, we are interviewing Alex for the next 25 minutes, asking him anything about Kubernetes and Chick-fil-A and how they're working. So please ask your questions as we go along. So I think what would be awesome is if you kind of gave us a really brief overview of like how you have Kubernetes deployed right now. So you said it goes out to, you know, all of your locations. Like, what does that look like?
Absolutely. So right now we have Kubernetes in every store to be a compute platform for a number of different apps that need to go to the restaurant, right? So kind of before that, every team had to roll out a separate bit of compute for each thing they did, right? They'd own this new piece of hardware. They'd own how it gets deployed. They'd probably have different ways of orchestrating that. So we rolled out Cube. That was way back in, in tech years, way back 2017, around the 2017 KubeCon.
Such a long time ago.
I know, but early adopters.
Yeah, and before that, we had looked at doing. We knew we wanted to bring kind of cheap compute to the restaurant, right? And by cheap, I mean more commodity, not kind of data center grade, $5,000 per box type stuff. We wanted to see what we could do to kind of put cheap, easy compute, kind of like taking the edge of the cloud, down to the restaurant. And we started off looking at a few things, including Cube. And then decided, hey, you know what? Cube looks too complicated. Let's roll our own container orchestration, as a lot of people did at the time. Docker Swarm didn't quite have enough. Cube had, it was too much. And then we kind of slowly found ourselves re-implementing most of what Kubernetes was doing, patterns, practices, etc. And there kind of came a point, and then we went to the KubeCon, and we were just kind of like, yeah, all right, it's let's base it off Cube instead of a roll our own. And we definitely have not regretted that decision.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. So we have a lot of folks here who are probably a little bit new, jumping on because they're learning. And so, like, how did you get started? So you just mentioned you decided not to roll your own. Did you work with like somebody's distro, or did you start with like vanilla Kubernetes from the beginning and then just build your orchestrators and everything on top of that?
Yeah. So we looked at a few things. We kind of looked at doing Kubernetes from scratch. Kind of basing off that, rolling our own completely. At the end of the day, we ended up settling on K3s from Rancher. They had a really tiny, tight cube, and that was perfect for what we were doing at the edge, where we wanted small footprint as we could get for Cube, easy to distribute, as well as it was fine for us to have a whole bunch of the kind of cloud backends, cloud API provider type backends not be present. That was actually a boon. So that part was pretty turnkey. The larger brunt of the work was around creating an operating system to put that on. There were reasons why CoreOS, now Container Linux, and a few others at the time wouldn't really work for us at the edge. They expected a number of things that the data center or cloud bring to the table, static, assignable DHCP addresses, very managed DNS, etc. And we didn't really have some of that at our edge. So we ended up basing that around Ubuntu, but lots of scripting to try to recreate kind of those conditions that we would have in the cloud, and then let K3s come on cleanly inside that. So
So how did you, because what we hear all the time is, there's like everyone's building operators, everyone's like, how did you get that skill? You're not a technology company. You, for those that aren't in the United States, you're everyone's favorite fast food restaurant is probably not how you would classify yourself. But, I remember when Chick-fil-A finally came to California, and it was like a party especially for my friends that had moved from the South because they were waiting for it. So, this is how we think of Chick-fil-A. Did you just have an entire team of software engineers that just happened to be Kubernetes experts? Like, how did that happen?
No, we were we were no Kubernetes experts at all at the time. Obviously, I mean, nobody was, right? It actually was pretty amusing as we were looking for some more people to fill out the team and get some of the implementation done. The people who would suddenly manifest with resumes that said that they had 3 to 5 years of Kubernetes experience. And I'm like, and they didn't have Google on their resume. So at the time, that seemed a little unreasonable. So yeah, that was a little difficult. But I think at the end of the day, the docs for Kube and kind of the clean APIs, for better or worse, for some of them, but around how Kube behaves was fairly straightforward to reason about. And then the other thing was trying to keep it simple. So we were trying to not do a lot of extra complicated things, keep the tooling lean, don't introduce a lot of other stuff. Maybe as an example for that, when we did secrets at the time, we had a choice of using external secrets, or I think Vault even had an early kind of provider there. But we wanted something, but we ended up writing our own little bit of Go code to bridge the secrets down in exactly the way that we needed, because there weren't unintended consequences. We could have a scalpel to do what we needed. So with most pieces of the implementation, that's the approach we took, was kind of keep it lean, keep it to the tight pieces. And after that, it was get people up to speed on Kube.
Mm-hmm. We do have a question from Jason Morgan, who asked, what value do you get out of pushing computing to your edge locations?
Absolutely. So that's a good question. We get that one a lot. A lot of people are like, hey, why don't you just get better internet to the stores and then do it in the cloud? And they're right for a good chunk of things. The challenge that we have is, which of those things, and on a normal basis, that would be fine. When the internet's up, that's generally okay. But at our restaurants, one of the issues that we have is that we're capacity constrained at a Chick-fil-A. So we get busy during lunch, we get busy during dinner, we get busy during breakfast. And so what happens if that internet goes out and we have things that we rely on running on that? So that could be point of sale, which would be the super critical piece. Well, of course, that has to run at the edge then. And at that point, it's okay. Well, if it does, we may as well also be able to leverage that compute platform for other things. But even past that, if you set point of sale aside, you say that's a super critical piece. Maybe it goes on its separate hardware. You have other use cases, things that help with capacity and getting customer orders right, and making sure that food safety needs are met, whether that's lightweight ML or just other bits of coordination. Those things, if they go offline, and those things making recommendations to team members for how many fries to drop, et cetera, if those things go offline during a lunch rush because the internet went out, then suddenly our capacity drops, right? And so that hurts everybody. And the other piece of that is one of the times that our stores are kind of needed most in a community, maybe overstating it, but after big events, hurricanes, tornadoes, other events, we end up slammed because a lot of people are without power at their house, and so they're looking for food. And so being able to be open, take orders, and get through that as well. So kind of all those are reasons that we looked at pushing it to the edge.
Well, and I know, like, for me, whenever I go to Chick-fil-A, it's just impressive how quickly, the place will be rammed and suddenly the food's there. And you're like, how are you able to keep everything moving? So that explains that. So, we're here as a bunch of companies who have open source technologies. And so obviously you're using Kubernetes, but are there other open source technologies that have become critical to your environment?
Definitely. There's a ton. Man, it's hard to list them all. So I cheated and kind of came up with a little list earlier, but there's prolifically more. But Grafana Prometheus, we use pretty heavily. Argo CD, we use a lot for our for those who know, it's a GitOps tool for applying stuff to kube clusters. External secrets, I mentioned that a minute ago. We use that a lot in the cloud. Kyverno, we've been using for policy enforcement. K3s, as already mentioned. But yeah, it's kind of hard to really list them all because there's so many that we use. And honestly, some of them work so well that we forget about them being there because they just kind of sit there doing their job and we forget about them. But yeah, just loads of good stuff. A lot of what we do, a lot of the projects are on the CNCF page, frankly. There's just a lot of good stuff there. I usually start there when looking for things. It's definitely projects that aren't on CNCF are definitely not bad in and of themselves. So we use a lot of stuff that's not in CNCF, but it's also, for me, usually a great place to start. And then I cheat and use the Google, right? Grab the project from CNCF and then do this thing, verse, throw it into the Google and see what autocomplete pops up and then kind of start reading and evaluating from there.
Are there certain things you do when you are evaluating an open source technology? Like, are you looking at, how many commits, like how interactive the community is? Like, what are the things you do before you're even willing to try it?
Sure. Yeah, look for, a little bit of info related to the Git repo, et cetera, right? Like, is there, does it have 3 commits, and that's it. Some of them kind of spike on Hacker News periodically, whatnot. But they're not. They're somebody's project, but they kind of haven't gotten any uptake. So look at that a little bit and kind of look for health there. Has there been movement in the past, year or two? Some of these projects are kind of lingering, but the person's moved on, and so they're not really maintained anymore. So kind of look for that for the freshness. But then past that, I look for digestibility of what's going on with it. These days, I like things that are kind of a scalpel about what they're doing, and they're not trying to do too much, as well as kind of the code. If the code seems well organized and well put together, then I usually feel a bit better about it. If a lot of times, a lot of the much older open source projects, and right now I'm probably looking at a lot of the Apache projects, Crocheted, but they're great projects, but they have like a decade or more of code base and tech debt and legacy features, et cetera. And so they feel very sprawly when I kind of take a look at those. But yeah, so to answer the question, yeah, usually look for like trim directed projects these days, but that may also be the Go developer in me. It's kind of premise of doing things.
This is so. I just have to say, it looks like one of your former colleagues is on here, and it's made a nice comment about how it's so great to see you talking about how you've used this technology to innovate what you're doing in your stores. And for those of you that are not in the United States, we can't even tell you how big this brand is. Like, it is so huge. And when they opened the one in Redwood City, California, the line for the drive-through was going around the block and down into the off-ramp for Highway 101 and blocking the traffic on Highway 101. So they had to leverage part of the gas station to roll the line of cars through, just waiting to get through the drive-through. I mean, this is a huge and very, very loved brand. And so having said that, since we're talking about open source and you've done all this innovation, have you contributed any of the code back to any of the projects and kind of pushed these projects along?
Yeah, so we're working on that a little bit internally, and there's some tools that we have or that we've written that we're looking to open source. One of the big things that we're trying to figure out is what our model looks like for some of that. I think one of the things we want to make sure is that if we do open source some of our items, that we know what commitment we're making when we do it. We're kind of a little worried about, hey, yeah, we'll open source this, but we're not really going to look at any of the pull requests or the bugs or take. So, as we do, we want to make sure that we publish it with the right model, and we kind of have decided on the level of support. Because even internally, right? I mean, just like we see with a lot of open source projects, right? A lot of devs are like, man, I'm going to change the world with this library. And they do, and they lose interest in about 3 or 6 months, and they don't want to, do it more. So it's kind of wanting to make sure we get that commitment. And then the other piece is contributing back to some of the CNCF projects is, I'll say, daunting, to some people. There's a few things that we've forked or patched kind of lightweight internally. Meeting the requirements to commit back to some of the major open source projects to date has been a little daunting. And not that they have not been welcoming. Many of them are very welcoming to it. They're very supportive of it. I think some of our devs maybe have felt self-conscious about their code. It's one thing that we're kind of probably in the next year going to be making a little bit of a push on to try to get some people over that hump and try to get some of those commits going back the other way.
So one of the other questions I have for you is around, this cloud native landscape is changing rapidly, right? There's new projects constantly coming. So are there any gotchas that you've run into in like the last year or 18 months, something that has happened that, as people are trying this technology or adopting it, rolling it out, that they might run into?
Yeah, I would just say the complexity. So the wonderful thing about Cube is that because it's, it has a base set of APIs that are well defined in there, it lends itself to extensibility and all the, and adding new features, new bolt-ons, etc. And that also comes with like complexity, right? Because as you keep adding things to make it what you want, then suddenly it becomes this crazy giant tangle of lots and lots of stuff. So I think for me right now, it's trying to walk that journey through supportable platforms built on Cube that don't. Sorry,
I took my dogs and put my dogs downstairs because right before we went live, they were wrestling all around us, and I was like, "Oh, probably not." Lisa was like, "Keep them here."
I was voting for the dogs to stay here. I'm sure everybody wants to see Danielle's dogs. They will make an appearance. So if you stay with us all day, the dogs will show up at some point.
But yeah, so I think it's complexity. So, I mean, a lot of people say Cube is complex and it doesn't have to be, right? Just like Linux, doesn't, or a Mac doesn't have to be complex, right? But what's our tendency as developers? Our tendency as developers is like, hey, I'm going to install these add-ons and these shell scripts and, these extensions, etc. And by the end of it, it's this giant mass of stuff, right? And sometimes it keeps working and sometimes it all explodes and you have to start over. So I think with Cube, that's where I'm at right now, is trying to walk that balance between how to keep things simple and something that's able to be reasoned about, not just by me, but by developers we have using our platform.
Awesome. And, I'm just going to say, like, we're going to wrap up with Alex in a moment, but if you have questions, please ask them now. This is your chance. Do you have thoughts around how the cloud native community is going to evolve, or where you see Kubernetes going, and maybe it's how you're using it today and what the plan is for the future?
Man, it's interesting. I'm not entirely positive. There's something I thought we'd see more movement on by now, and we haven't. So I'm starting to think that I might be wrong. The thing that I've been kind of expecting to see is what I'll call more specific Kubernetes distributions that covered more than just the core. So if, to use Linux as a metaphor, where Cube would be the kernel, kind of expecting to see userland suites of distributions on top that don't just include, branded Cube, like Amazon EKS or Google Kubernetes engine, but more, or Rancher Kubernetes engine, but more so, the whole kit and caboodle with GitOps and visibility and kind of all the tooling. And we're seeing a little more of that, but a lot of them in maybe the proprietary SaaS space for that, and kind of hoping to see some things more along the lines of, Ubuntu, SUSE, self-deployable, open source, kind of strong ecosystem brought to the table.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any more questions. Do you have any more questions?
No, I think this is, first of all, it's been really amazing speaking with you. Very nice to meet you. This is like a main stage keynote at KubeCon. I hope you submit a talk, because I'm sure the community would love to hear this story. It's an incredible story you told us. So thank you for sharing it with us here first.
And we'll see you at KubeCon. Alex will be at KubeCon.
Oh,
so
right
we'll
on.
see him in real life, which will be exciting. Oh, we do have a question that just came. We'll ask this first. How do you evaluate the security trustworthiness of the open source software you decide to use?
Yeah, so that's a bit of a difficult one, but at the end of the day, it's a little bit of a gut check. That's one of the reasons why, usually kind of look at what it would be doing, make sure that it's gated. So in Cube, that if it's something that runs, that it's something that we really only give it those RBAC permissions to perform the job that it needs to perform. In the other pieces, that's one of the reasons I look, generally speaking, for things that have a good quantity of users, something like external secrets or other tools that are widely used. It doesn't mean there can't be a vulnerability in there, but it means there's a lot more eyes on it and a lot of people kind of digging into weird behaviors it may exhibit at times. So,
Cool. All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll see you at KubeCon.
Sounds great. Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Enjoy
Thank
KubeCraft.
you.